This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to take you along on the amazing race for regular people. That's how the Chicago Tribune described Competitours. It's a nearly 2-week trip with a mystery itinerary, unknown destinations, and challenges along the way. Oh, and did we mention the $6,000 grand prize? Our guest today is Steve Belkin, the self-described president and mastermind of Competitours. He's joining us via Skype from his home in Cleveland, Ohio. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I love the entire idea of this. I've got a bunch of questions for you. So let's start with the 3 questions we ask all of our guests. And with your experience, of course, I'm really curious to hear these answers. First of all, what has been your biggest discovery in your lifetime of traveling?
My biggest discovery, Mark, would be the advent of learning how to game or leverage the airline frequent flyer programs. It's opened up the world to me. So there's no place that I can't go for free and in business class. It's a great combination.
Oh, my goodness. And does that include Antarctica? Because I've been looking for an excuse to get to Antarctica all my life. So that'd be great to know. What's the favorite place, then, that you've been to?
Wow, that's tough.
It's hard to choose, I know.
Is it fair to say any place where I need to have a passport to get to?
Man after my own heart. I love that.
Narrows the field a little bit. Yeah, I like going abroad. Any place where there's a new culture, new food, new architecture, new music, new history tends to be high on my list. I'm not a big fan of Australia. It's just another place where there's a lot of white people speaking English, or the UK. So I could say that those are the places that I probably would be least want to go back to.
You know, Steve, I try to go somewhere new every time. I mean, we've got, 198 countries, I think, and, life is too short, and I'm trying to get to everywhere, so I totally agree with you. I think that's fantastic. And what's the next place that you're traveling to?
Much to my wife's chagrin, I'm going to be, although she did give me a hall pass, so it's okay, I'll be heading to Honduras, Utila, which is a small island off of the Caribbean coast, next month to get my scuba instructor certification. So I'll be there for about a month decamping and learning the ropes.
Oh, my goodness. You'll have to check out on voyagereport.com. We've got one of our destinations, Honduras, and a buddy of mine and I went, and there's this island, Roatan, Honduras, and there's this tiny restaurant run incredibly by American expat. It's called Hole in the Wall, and you can't walk there, you can't drive there, you can't fly there. You have to take a water taxi. It's really incredible. The food is not totally remarkable, but just the journey to get there is what is really eye-opening and enjoyable. So maybe you'll have to check that out. Now, Competitours, this is your brainchild. You just finished the 9th year of doing this, wrapping up the 2017 team travel competition in Europe. Tell us all about Competitours. What is it?
Wow. Well, as you said at the beginning, the amazing race for regular people is what the Chicago Tribune likes to call us. I take that label with a little bit of a grain of salt, because unlike the Amazing Race, we're not about doing crazy things like eating insects or major physical challenges. And there's certainly no drama queens that come on our trip. I think it's more of like a beauty contest for travel. Is that most of the challenges that we offer are about being creative and resourceful, not being fast or being in great fitness. So it's a level playing field. Anybody can play. There's no eliminations. So it's more like your vacation is, instead of having margaritas and sitting at the beach, we're keeping you real busy for 11 or 12 days.
In fact, you call it sight doing, not sightseeing.
Exactly, and that's my personal travel ethos. I like to be busy. I probably have adult ADHD that's not been diagnosed, and Competitours is my antidote for travel. And most of the people that come on the tour pretty much have the same sense of adventure and curiosity. They've done the cruises, they've done the beach and margarita scene. They've done the sitting on a bus listening to a guide, and I'd like to think we kind of offer a third rail opportunity.
So if you want to sit on the beach for 5 days, this is not for you.
No way. Not even close.
Not even close.
And we'll weed you out. You'll never get on the trip. Well, we have a pretty good vetting. Pretty good vetting process, Mark. And if I smell suntan lotion and Cuervo, we'll see you after the trip.
Yeah, no dead weight. Now let's break this down. It's 11 challenge days, 10 teams. You've got surprise challenges. So what exactly is this? Do you tell the groups when they sign up, when they pay their entrance fee, do you tell them where they're going, or the entire thing is a mystery?
Yeah, the entire trip is a mystery, and every year the trip changes. And oftentimes when the teams are registering, I'm not exactly sure what the trip is going to be on myself. Oftentimes the trip is kind of a work in progress up until maybe a month or two before the trip. But we do guarantee that you'll see at least 4 different countries and 8 or 9 different unique destinations. And I think that the thrill of the unknown is a real calling card for us, is that these teams basically have to put their trust in a total stranger, that we're going to curate 11 days of fun and hopefully back close to 900.
This is a leap of faith for people that sign up.
Hell yeah.
I love that. And so how much notice do you give teams? Do you tell them, like, on Tuesday we're going to be going to this country, Wednesday we're going to be going to this country?
Right, Mark. We give them enough notice so that they have a chance to plan for what's going to be coming up during their free time in the next challenge destination. But at the same time, it's typically only 12 to 24 hours. We want it to be surprised. The teams enjoy the thrill of the unknown. And more importantly, they get points for trying to guess and get inside my head where they're going next. So we keep it very close to the vest till the last possible moment.
And of course, essential to Competitours are these challenges. What is a challenge?
So our challenges span the gamut. Like on our most recent trip this past summer, we had everything from surfing to learning how to play highlight in Basque Country, to an Iron Chef competition, to alpine coasters, which are basically roller coasters that only go down, not up and down like they do in the States, to raft building, which is kind of like a team building exercise, except it's competitive, to a chocolate war where we take over a chocolate factory and teams have to make a crazy, technically difficult chocolate design. So there's no rhyme or reason from year to year how we do things. The challenges always change. And again, it's typically a level playing field. You don't have to have any specific skills to make it work. And if you do happen to have a skill, we'll figure out a way to handicap you.
Listeners, the website is Competitours, Tours, just like it sounds, competitours.com. And if you go on there, you'll find 12 challenge icons that they have on there, where Steve sort of gives you a little highlight of everything, just like he was describing some of the icons there: culinary to artisan to myths and legends, alpine coaster, as he was mentioning, labyrinth, chocolate, and paraglide. And Steve, you were talking about chocolate. That's one of those icons on there, and let's be honest, I would skip right to that challenge. I would, in fact, ask you if we could do it every single day.
We typically save that for the last day of most of our trips because, yeah, you're in good company. There's something about chocolate and Americans that's just magnetic.
Exactly. Well, we were talking also about that this is more of a sight doing than a sightseeing. And, you describe the trip this way: a mix of iconic cities, medieval towns, mountain hamlets, and coastal enclaves. So these aren't just the major metropolises of London and Paris. You are actually getting into the heart of these countries.
Yeah, in fact, there's oftentimes 1 or 2 places that we go to where the locals of that country aren't exactly sure where that particular destination is. They're like,
wow.
I'm pretty sure it's in the northwest part of the country, but I haven't been there, and I don't know anybody that's ever been there before. So yeah, I dig pretty deep. And the one thing that no matter what your evaluation of the trip is, every single team will always tell you that there's no other company that will ever replicate our itineraries or our challenge activities. And that's a high bar, and I'm happy to aspire toward it.
So how do you put together these itineraries? I mean, what do? Go on a scouting trip a couple months before?
Actually, the scouting trips take place a couple days before and a couple days after each trip. So I actually put together the following year's trip within, let's see, within 2 weeks of the trip starting and ending the year before. So I already have a pretty good idea of what 2018 is going to look like. I just have to figure out which order I want to do them in, and which where the cheapest airfares and what the best hotels are. But I'm ready to go. Are you ready to come?
Well, I wish I am ready to go. Although, listeners, we're going to tell you how much it costs later on. I'm not sure I can afford it, but I am ready to come. Let's talk about this has been going on now. You just finished your 9th year. Steve, how has this changed along the way? I realize it's different every year, but what have you learned, and how has it changed as you've gone along?
Your question is quite timely, Mark, because we actually had 2 teams this year that were on our inaugural trip back in 2009, and they basically didn't recognize the trip in 2017, both
Wow.
in terms of execution and parenthetically in terms of price, because in fact it's a totally new methodology that we've evolved to. I'd say that the key difference was that back in 2008 and 9, this trip was pretty much a scavenger hunt. We'd plop you in a city, and we'd give you a lot of obscure places within a destination to go to, and find stuff and take video to prove that you were there. And this is back when Wi-Fi was not so ubiquitous. So oftentimes we had teams up until 3 or 4 in the morning, on razor thin internet pipelines trying to upload video, and it was not such a pleasant experience for me or the teams. Whereas today, the trip is far more, as you keep mentioning, about sight doing, which is we actually find activities that all the teams can either do together or in rotating groups, and it's much more about getting your hands dirty as opposed to poking around different places around a given town. So the scavenger hunt aspect has been replaced by, hey, look, we're the only team the only trip that's ever doing a cooking challenge at a cooking school, as opposed to a normal, pallet cooking class. So everything that we do, we turbocharge above and beyond what a normal trip would offer.
Steve, this sounds like so much work. How in the world did you ever decide to start doing this? I mean, the stress must be unbelievable on you.
This is my passion. This is my excuse to go to Europe every year.
But you could just buy a ticket and do it with all this much less hassle, I would imagine.
Yeah, but then it would be sight doing. It would be sightseeing instead of sight doing. I love what I do, so it's not considered work or stressful. And I only do it once a year during the summer, so it's more of a hobby than it really is kind of a business. And as far as the amount of work is concerned, I'm learning new things about all these little nooks and crannies in Europe that nobody's ever heard of before. So for me, it's fascinating. It's not fatiguing in the least.
One of your mottos is, quote, "We push you gently out of your comfort zone so you'll discover skills you never even knew existed." I love that. Like what?
Well, it depends who you talk to. Some people will argue that we push them a little bit harder, not so gently, and that we go well outside their comfort zone. But I like the propaganda that I have on the website. For example, we in the last 3 years we've been doing something called a Via Ferrata, which is basically being able to climb the face of a mountain with absolutely zero previous experience and not needing any particular skill or fitness. But it's a huge mental challenge because you're literally on the side of a mountain looking anywhere from 700 to 11,000 feet down, and you have to traverse that mountain. And the only thing that's holding you up is a harness and a couple of carabiners, and typically a very skilled guide, shadowing you. But it's something that most people assume that they have fear of heights. And they realize that all of their fears are mental. That physically they can do this, they just have to get over the mental hump of doing something that nobody in America would ever allow them to do because they wouldn't pay for the insurance.
Well, is there an option to skip that part and just wait for you at the chocolate factory?
Yeah, we certainly never push anybody beyond what they feel they're comfortable doing. But there's a lot of positive peer pressure, Mark, to get involved with these challenges, and also everybody knows deep down that I'm not going to put them in any position of danger or compromising their safety or their health. And usually my integrity and my credibility comes from the fact that I take my now 18-year-old daughter every year prior to test market every one of these challenges. So if she comes back alive, it's safe to say that everybody else is fair game.
Well, let's talk about safety and security. How does that go into your thinking in all these places? In the past 2 years or so, 18 months, we've seen these terror attacks in London, Paris, Nice, Brussels. I mean, these are some iconic cities. These are iconic countries where people want to go. Some of these countries you take your teams through. So how do you assess safety and security, and how does that play a role?
Most teams don't find this answer very satisfying, but it's true, which is I like to go places relatively close to disasters or tragedies, and not to minimize or discount them, God forbid, but rather, ironically, the safest place to be anywhere in the world is in the aftermath of a terrorist attack or something terrible happening. I mean, I was in Bali 3 months after the Bali bombings in 2006 and at the tail end of the civil war in Sri Lanka. And those places could not have been more tied down as far as safety is concerned. But I think the bigger issue is if you're concerned about terrorism, then you shouldn't be forget Competitours. Don't go travel because nobody can guarantee your safety anywhere. It might be that terrorism is the new normal, and you just have to hope that that you get lucky and it skips past you. And really, none of the teams that have ever been on our trip have ever dumped out because of anything that's happened in Europe over the last 3 years. We always give them the opportunity to dump out if they feel like it's going to be dangerous to them, but nobody does. So I think the people who come on our trip kind of think like me, which is, life happens, and if you're not going to, if you're not willing to take a little bit of a chance, then you shouldn't be even going to the airport and hopping on a plane in the first place.
Well, I think a lot of our listeners may agree with you. I know I certainly do. I mean, there are things happening every place in the world, whether it be here in the United States or Canada or anywhere else. And I mean, there are car crashes and plane crashes and things happen. And, our journey of exploration here on this earth, you can either stay indoors, you can go and explore and see the rest of the world. And so I think that there are ways you can be safe and secure. We've got tips on our website for doing that. But I agree with you. I mean, I think that at some point you have to, of course, be aware and alert, but also not keep fear from allowing you to see more of the world.
And by the way, Mark, as a postscript to that, we actually did for the first time ever. We did have a challenge in Brussels not long after the Brussels bombing a year and change ago, and I really didn't want to move it. And the teams didn't know we were going to Brussels in the first place, so I made a unilateral decision. Okay, you know what? There's 3 other places where we can do this type of challenge, and we did move it. So the good news is that the trip is modular enough that if we really do need to make a last-minute decision because of something that's really problematic, that we can.
Listeners, we are going to be asking Steve a little bit later today for his tips for travelers, whether you're a frequent traveler or infrequent traveler. He's gone around the world so much. Certainly we're going to be interested in hearing what his tips are. And he actually has a side business that we're going to tell you about in a little bit that's really interesting and might be appealing for a lot of you that have airline frequent flyer miles building up in your account. So we're going to ask him about that a little bit later. Steve, what are the requirements for people who can join Competitours? You alluded to this earlier, but you specifically say on the website, no crazy drama queens, mega jocks, and hyper type A folks.
Enough said, Mark. If you're not one of them, we're thrilled to have you.
But they don't need any prior travel experience. I mean, what if they've never even used their passport? What if this is the first time they've ever gotten a passport?
Right. In fact, this summer we had two out of our 20 teammates or participants on the trip had never been to Europe before. And one of them finished in second place, and I think one of them finished in fourth or fifth. So
Wow.
it clearly was not a disadvantage. Again, the watchwords are really level playing field. Is that we make it so that if you're 11 or 71, you're going to have an equally good shot at having days where you're going to kick ass and other days where you're probably going to be the least worst instead of the best.
You mentioned 11. Was that your daughter? Who was 11 years old?
No, we had a mother-daughter team this past summer, and she was our youngest contestant so far. We've had 14 to 17-year-olds in the past, and on the more veteran end of things, we've had at least 3 teams over the last 3 years that have been pushing 70, and they're keeping up just fine.
In fact, you have a spot on your website where you actually market to intergenerational trips. And we had a story at VoyageReport.com a few weeks ago that multi-generational travel, particularly on cruise ships, is actually up more than any other demographic or group for 2017. So you clearly have different generations joining your team. In fact, I did notice that earlier this year, U.S. News and World Report, congratulations, picked Competitours as one of their top 10 vacations where you can reconnect as a family. So how appealing is that for people?
It's probably more appealing to the kid than the parent, because it's an interesting dynamic to see that the parent-child relationship kind of morphs into a teammate peer relationship. And there are days where the kid is really kind of leading the charge, either because they have a skill set that the parent doesn't have, or the parent is a little bit hesitant to express that skill set. So I think that the parents have found a newfound respect toward their kids at the end of the trip, not realizing that, wow, I didn't realize my kid had it in them. And it's also really cool for the other teams, because the other teams don't necessarily look at the kid as a kid. They just look at them as, all right, this happens to be the youngest competitor on the trip. So oftentimes when you treat a teen like a young adult, they kind of take the bait and rise to the occasion. So we found that the kids are just treated by the other teams as fellow travelers, and the parents are really surprised to see that the kids have a level of maturity that they don't normally see at home.
A fascinating dynamic. Perhaps they grow up in 11 days, and that relationship evolves as well.
We should be paid for that, right?
Exactly. Your side pay as a psychologist or something, encouraging that. Okay, the $64,000 question, how much is this going to cost if somebody listening to this podcast wants to join you for your next Competitours adventure? What's the going rate?
$64,000 minus $60,005.
So essentially $4,000.
Yeah, $39.75.
$39.75. And what does that include exactly?
It's per person, double occupancy, all the challenges, all the local transport between cities, breakfast, a couple of meals, lunch and dinner. We tend to let meals be an independent part of the trip, and we don't include it, not because we're trying to be cheap. It's just that we've realized between no sugar, no gluten, vegan, no whatever, I've lost track, no peanuts, allergies, restrictions, etc., that we just like to punt and tell teams, eat whatever the heck you want when you're off the clock. So dinners tend to be an opportunity for teams to express their individual culinary preferences, and lunch tends to be a grab and go. So it's not really a major factor as far as teams having to spend a lot of time or money.
So on the spectrum of camping in the woods and staying at the Ritz-Carlton, what are your lodging options?
So if it were up to me, I like to spend money when I'm awake, not when I'm asleep. So I would be just as happy staying in clean, comfortable, Hilton Garden Inn type places. But at the end of the day, we do attract a travel demographic that does have some appreciation for the finer things in life. So we tend to try to stay at, for sure, locally owned, where it's possible, iconic hotels or boutique hotels. But first and foremost, we try to be central to what it is that we're doing. So we like to be near the activity or near the train station. Everybody has to carry their own luggage. We don't do bellhops, and the people that carry their own luggage, they don't tip well anyway. So we try to make sure that the hotels are memorable without being the focus of the tour, because that's not why you're on this trip, is because of the hotels.
I know on your website, at least one part of your website, it says you're going to reveal the 2018 dates November 1st, but I think maybe those dates are out. Can we reveal them here on this podcast?
You'll be the first.
I love exclusives.
June 25th to July 6th, 2018. We always try to make sure that we can squeeze a July 4th date in the trip, because it's an extra couple of days that you can travel and not be penalized by your employer.
Easier to get away.
Yeah.
So listeners, there you go. You've got an 11-month heads up here. June 25th to July 6th is the 2018 installment of Competitours. So you can start saving now. I can't do math in my head that well, but I assume if you set aside, maybe $100 or $200 a week or so, you will get that money within the next 11 months before the next trip comes around. Steve, do you foresee doing this for years to come? Are you looking to pass this along? Are you looking to expand it? What's the goal for this in the future?
It's a good question, Mark.
There's a pregnant pause here, listeners.
Well, you remember that hall pass I told you about at the very beginning that I got from my wife to go to Honduras for a month?
Yes.
My guess is that if I can continue to behave myself the other 11 months a year, that I'll continue to get more hall passes to maybe offer another trip during the summer if there's demand. And for 2018 in August, I'm already sniffing around doing a Southeast Asia trip. We had about half of the teams from our 2017 trip that were like, put me on the private email list if you're really going to do something in Southeast Asia. So I have had experience traveling there, so I have some good contacts on the ground. So it might be, if you're looking to go east instead of west, we still might be a good travel destination for you.
And what do you do on the other 11 months of the year?
I have a mileage award booking service for folks who have lots of airline miles and or credit card points, but they just can't seem to figure out a way to call those elusive international business and first class award seats from the airlines. They're not easy to find in the airlines. They're happy to help you earn points, but when it comes time to redeem them, they're oftentimes quite quiet. So we're kind of your ally and advocate to help you find those high value award seats.
Steve's website for that is bookyouraward.com, bookyouraward.com. We all know the frustrations with trying to redeem airline miles. Either they're being devalued and the redemption amount is going up, or it doesn't seem there are any seats for the next 330 days, or whatever it is. You can obviously contact Steve and he'll help you with that. And by the way, listeners, Steve knows what he's talking about. Is this correct, Steve? You've accrued more than 45 million miles in your life? Do I have that right? Did I misplace a decimal point or something?
You're probably within 5 to 7 million. Yeah, you're close. I think that number might have gone up in the last couple of years. I've been doing a lot of credit card churning and burning and earning. So yeah, probably 50 plus. It's been a hell of a run. Thank you.
It's pretty impressive, especially when you can fly up front and not with the rest of us in the back of the bus. Yeah, exactly. Let's get to some tips for travelers. Our travelers listen to our podcast, and every guest has an interesting take on things. And I'm curious, Steve, to put you on the spot here, and what would you say for those frequent travelers? Maybe they travel once a year or twice a year. They've used their passport before. I'm sure there are tips that you've picked up in your travels, in your life, in your experience with Competitours and with bookyouraward.com that you can share with them. Are there any words of advice that you can pass along for frequent travelers?
I think the most satisfying aspect of travel for me is figuring out how to bypass the middlemen. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I'm not sure that a lot of people really understand that companies who present themselves as the end user aren't really. And I make it my business to dig really deep and find out who's actually doing what it is that is being pitched on a particular site, whether it be an activity, a destination, you name it. And especially in the Far East or in Southeast Asia, everybody owns a boat on the Mekong River, but they don't. There's somebody that actually has the deed to that boat. And those are the kind of people that I like to find. Or with the chocolate factory, I don't want to deal with Nestle. I want to deal with the chef who's actually going to be in the room telling the teams how to do a challenge. So I think it takes a heck of a lot of time and research and perseverance, but it's very satisfying to know that you're dealing with the people who are equally vested in your success because they're the ones whose names are on the contract. And from my standpoint, it's great because I'm paying and the money is going directly to the person who should be benefiting. And for our trip, every team will tell you that at the beginning of the trip, since they've never been on it, $3,900 sounds like a lot of money. But at the end of the trip, there's never a peep about, wow, this is great, but it was kind of expensive. Nobody ever says that. So the value proposition oftentimes is, you pay a lot, but you get a crazy amount well above what you paid for. So we've never had a problem with value proposition. And I think that's something that frequent travelers should strive toward. Don't be lazy and look at a list price and go, wow, that just must be what it costs, because most of the time it ain't.
And what are some tips for infrequent travelers? These are the people who may never have used their passport before. Maybe this is their once-in-a-lifetime trip, whether it's with Competitours or simply going to Paris for a week. What would your tips be for those who might not be familiar with international travel? Perhaps they're a little overwhelmed or frustrated or just worried about it. What would you say to them?
So to them, I would say, using your example of Paris, is don't go to Paris. Don't go to London. Don't go to Berlin. Stay away from the brand names, not because they're not interesting or fun or a good value, but because you're going to have an experience that will mirror everyone else that goes to that place. There's not a lot that you can do in Paris where you can come back and say, wow, I did A, B, and C, and everybody else who went there is like, oh yeah, so did I. Is look a little bit off the beaten track. Okay, pick some place within a 150-mile radius of Paris and go there, and come back with an experience that nobody can replicate. I think that there's something really satisfying about ownership of an experience that nobody else can replicate. It might also be a little bit greedy and a little bit selfish, but I hate the pedestrian and I hate the and I hate the ubiquitous.
I'll tell you what, I want to go to every country in the world. Romania is obviously a country in the world, but it wasn't really at the top of my list. And then on voyagereport.com/deals, on our deals page, I noticed a round-trip fare on Delta for $452, and I thought, I'm sold. And I just got back from there last month, and it was, I'll tell you, the hidden gem in Europe. I mean, I was blown away driving through the hills of Transylvania and going to all these castles and fortified churches and forts and sitting in the plazas in Brasov and Cebu, and it was just amazing. And so exactly what you're talking about, find somewhere perhaps off the beaten path. I have never been disappointed by doing that. And you find these amazing places. When I said, hey, I'm going to Romania, people looked at me like, why would you go to Romania? And now it's like, why wouldn't you go to Romania? It was just absolutely amazing. So I think that's fantastic advice for people to try and go somewhere that's not the well-traveled path.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah.
One word. Saying shh, like be quiet, like you found it. Don't tell everybody.
Oh. Yes, exactly. I should not have shared the secret, but we had such a great time. We even did a podcast, our first podcast in the field, and you can go and listen to it with our guide. We had a guide for 2 days there, and he was just fantastic. So yeah, it was a hidden gem, and I think probably a lot of the places that you go, Steve, there are hidden gems that you find. And my hat's off to you. If I scrape together the $4,000, I'm going to be there. But let me try to press you as a journalist must
Sure.
before I let you go. June 25th to July 6th of next year. Can you give us a hint? Do you have a riddle, a haiku, anything where it's going to be, or do you just not know yourself?
Well, like I said, I do most of my research right before and after the current trip that we're on. So it's safe to say that I have a pretty good idea of where we're going to go. I'm not sure which order. Can I give you a haiku or some kind of
and listeners,
hint?
just so that you know, I am putting him on the spot. I did not tell him I was going to be asking. So if he does come up with something, it'll be even more impressive than everything we've talked about. But I don't want to spoil all the surprise for your next teams either. It will be on planet Earth. We can guarantee you that.
It's the largest one in the world.
The largest.
It's the largest one in the world.
Now, what is one? Is that a city, a country, a place, a hotel, a clock tower, a plaza,
yeah,
a submarine? You're not going to tell us. Well, there you go, listeners.
The largest one.
The largest one. Listeners, you can learn more about Competitours. They have a Facebook page. They have a YouTube channel. Their website, Competitours.com. I'll spell it Competitours. Tours, Tours at the end, Competitours.com. Our guest is Steve Belkin, the self-described president and mastermind of Competitours. What an invention. What a journey. Steve, my hat's off to you. It sounds amazing.
You can call me evil mastermind because that's what most teams call me by the end of the trip.
Right, when they're exhausted, but they're thrilled. And as you mentioned, you haven't had anyone asking for a refund yet, so you must be doing something right.
So far, so good. Thank you,
Steve. Thank you very much for joining us. He also has a business that helps you use your airline miles. If you can't figure out all the rules and regulations and you're frustrated, you can also check that out at BookYourAward.com. Listeners, are you ready to compete in Competitours? Do you know someone who would be perfect for this? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at VoyageReport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at VoyageReport.com.